All right, how's everybody doing? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. It is Thursday, July 19th, 2018, and we're live. How's everybody doing? All right, so I am back from Atlanta. I was in Atlanta for the Black Homeschooling Conference, Friday, July uh, 13th through Sunday, July 15th. I stayed there a couple extra days. So I hope everybody's doing well. Conference was great this year. I'll do a separate broadcast and talk about the Black Homeschooling Conference. But I saw this story, and while I was out of town, and well, actually, on the 18th, I saw this story, and wanted to talk about it. And this deals with a construction site in Texas, where remains of African Americans' bodies were found. And it's believed that they were forced into labor after slavery ended, okay, in 1865, all right? And it's believed that they were victims of the convict leasing system. So New York Times has an article about this. Also, AtlantaBlackStar.com has an article about this as well, and MSN.com, and I saw some local news sources out of Texas with this story as well, okay? So how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page, okay? And then also, you can still advertise with the African History Network as well to get new customers for your Black-owned business, take your business to the next level. Email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll talk about that some as well. All right, so when we look at this story from New York Times, all right, came out July 18th, okay, Wednesday, July 18th, New York Times. Remains of Black people forced into labor after slavery are discovered in Texas. All right. And they talk about how there's an archaeologist that's on this construction site that talks about how this is a significant find and how this is they're going to have to change the history books because of this discovery as well. All right. So the remains of dozens of people found at a construction site in Texas in mid-April of 2018 are most likely those of African Americans who were forced to work on a plantation there in the Texas area around the turn of the 20th century, so early 1900s. And officials stated this week. Now, that finding was announced Monday, and it opens a window onto a little remembered period in which African Americans in certain southern states were essentially treated like slaves post-emancipation. So basically, after slavery ends, you have that period of time, 1865 to 1877, known as Reconstruction. We know the Civil War officially ends June 2nd, I should say, June 2nd, 1865, okay? And you're going to have the Black codes that are instituted in 1865 in the southern states. You're going to have various types of vagrancy laws, things like this. You're going to have the sharecropping system instituted as well, because the South is largely destroyed because of the Civil War. And the white Southerners are trying to figure out where is the labor force going to come from. The labor force, which were the enslaved Africans, 4 million of them were freed. So who's going to plant the crops? Who's going to till the soil? Okay, who's going to grow the cotton? Things like this. So you have a sharecropping system that's instituted, and you're going to have labor contracts that are required to be renewed at the beginning of each year in a lot of these southern states. And if you want to have a profession other than agriculture, or maybe being a domestic, largely you're going to have to, in some of these states, like South Carolina, you're going to be required to pay some type of tax as well. So you have a sharecropping system that's going to tie a lot of these former slaves back to some of the plantations that they were freed from. Then you're going to have a convict leasing system that's used from 1865 to 1928. Alabama was the last state to outlaw the convict leasing system. And this is going to be used in place of the prisons, because a lot of the prisons are going to be destroyed during the Civil War. Okay, so the remains of about 95 people were discovered early in 2018, around mid-April 2018, on a construction site outside of Houston, Texas, where the Fort Bend Independent School District, BEND, Fort Bend Independent School District, is building a new school. And this is according to school district officials and court records. So this week, archaeologists announced that the bones were most likely those of African-American laborers who worked as part of the so-called convict lease system or convict leasing system, in which the state of Texas outsourced prisoners to work and live on plantations. Now, the researchers estimated that the cemetery, which was on the plantation's grounds, was used from 1878 to 1911. Okay, so this is 1878 is the year after Reconstruction ends, with the Compromise of 1877. Okay, and Rutherford B. Hayes, Republican, becomes president, and the agreement with the Democrats is to remove the Union troops out of the South. The Union troops were to a certain extent enforcing the laws and enforcing the rights of the newly freed former slaves. Okay, all right. So this all deals with history. This find here all deals with history. You're dealing with slavery. You're dealing with Civil War. You're dealing with Reconstruction. You're dealing with the convict leasing system, and this all has an impact on what is taking place today. Unfortunately, many of our people and many white people don't understand this history. Okay. If you like this type of information, be sure to register for the online courses that I teach. We have them in the bundle pack. We just posted a link here. We have them in a bundle pack of 10-course online bundle pack, all on demand. It also includes ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Afua, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, which is a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I teach that deals with thousands of years of history. So that 10-course online bundle pack is on sale, $60, regularly $130. It's all on demand. You can watch from around the world. All right, now, about half, so there were 95 bodies that have been uncovered, okay? About half of the bodies have been exhumed, and more than 20 have been analyzed. Of those analyzed, archaeologists said all but one were male. So basically all of the bodies that have been analyzed were males. And they ranged in the age from about 14 years old to 70 years old. All of the bodies were African Americans, and some may have been former slaves. Now, the article from the New York Times goes on to say it is rare to discover an African American cemetery from this time period, but rarer still to find a grave site of African American prisoners from the convict lease system era. And this was stated by Ken Brown. Ken Brown is a professor at the University of Houston who specializes in African American archaeology, okay? And he said, you have a chance to study what the actual bone material has to say about what life was like, okay? You have a chance to study what the actual bone material has to say about what life was like. We know it was crappy. We know it was tough. But what impact does all of that have on the body? Okay, now we know that based upon the condition of the bones, when you do repetitive work and you're living under harsh work conditions like the convict leasing system, there's going to be a lot of wear on the bones, maybe some type of deterioration as well from the repetitive movements, from the harsh conditions that they lived under. Now, researchers hope to run tests that could tell which diseases the prisoners lived with, what kind of foods they ate, and where they grew up. It's Rain Clark, who is a lead archaeologist on the site, said it really does change the history books in Texas. It really does change the history books in Texas. Now, the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified December 6, 1865, and was adopted December 18, 1865, stated that it abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. Now, several southern states, including Texas, used this exception to outsource prisoners for labor, said Ken Brown, Professor Ken Brown. All right. Now, Texas first leased out prisoners for caretaking on plantations and later took over the land as state-run prison farms. Okay. Texas first leased out prisoners for caretaking on plantations and later took over the land as state-run prison farms. Now, Reginald Moore, who is a historian and prison reform advocate who has studied convict leasing in the Houston area, said it was, quote, more or less slavery by a new name. It was, quote, more or less slavery by a new name. And that's true in many ways. Convict leasing system was worse than slavery. Now, if we look at PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System, PBS.org, they have some information on convict leasing under the heading of slavery by another name. And they talk about how after the Civil War, the South's economy, society, and government were in shambles, okay? Because the South, the South was basically destroyed largely by the Civil War. If you watch a movie like Gone with the Wind, okay, you see the devastation that the Civil War does to plantations, does to the way of life of the plantation owners, the genteel class, just the South in general, okay? And you're going to have a lot of the enslaved Africans as the Union troops come through and take control of various territories. They're going to follow the Union troops along. They're going to follow along the trail of the Union troops as well. Some are going to join, some of the men are going to join up with the Union troops also. Now, Southern state governments struggled to raise money to repair damaged infrastructure and to support new expenses such as universal public education. The prison problem was especially challenging as most prisons had been destroyed during the Civil War, which is from 1861 to 1865. It starts April 12, 1861 with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And we know South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union December 20th, 1860, 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect on November 6th, 1860. Now, previously, African-American slaves had been subjected to punishments at the hand of their slave owners. With government ineffectiveness and an increase in both white and black lawlessness, the problem of where and how to house convicts was significant. Now, it's also important to understand you have a lot of poor whites in the South as well after the Civil War ends. So when you have the Freedmen's Bureau, the U.S., it was officially known as the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands. They not only helped formerly enslaved African Americans, or formerly enslaved Africans, they also helped poor, destitute whites as well. Okay. Now, so previously African American slaves had been subjected to the punishments at the hands of their slave owners. With government ineffectiveness and an increase in both white and black lawlessness, the problem of where and how to house convicts was significant. So initially, some states paid private contractors to house and feed the prisoners. Within a few years, states realized they could lease out their convicts to local planters, okay, or industrialists who would pay minimal rates for the workers and be responsible for their housing and feeding, thereby eliminating costs and increasing revenue. All right. So the convict leasing system took the place of prisons in a lot of these southern states. All right. And they're going to be, these prisoners will be used for all types of very hard, dangerous work, working in coal mines. Okay. Working on railroad tracks, laying railroad tracks, things like this. Very hard type of labor. the convict leasing system would be used for this. And the convict leasing system is then going to give way to the chain gang. So if you're a Sam Cooke fan like I am, you know Sam Cooke had a song called Chain Gang. All right, and he said, you know, that's the sound of the men working on the chain gang. So there's a whole history that ties into this. The chain gangs come out of the convict leasing system. Convict leasing system is going to be used 1865 to 1928, right after slavery ends. All right. Now, what's interesting is why the convict leasing system basically was ended. That's what's interesting. And this ties into these white labor unions, right? And we see these white labor unions are going to be formed basically after slavery ends, and you have these 4 million enslaved Africans, and many of them have skills that are equal to white men or better than white men, because there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And these skills, trades, and crafts are going to be used to build this country. Okay. We did a whole lot more than just pick cotton, contrary to popular belief. Okay. Even though cotton was king, and you know, you're going to have in about the 1840s, going to be about 75,000 cotton plantations in this country. Even though cotton is king, we did more than just pick cotton. So let me show you this here quickly. Let me see, make sure this comes up. We should have this up. All right, let's go to this one right here. Okay, so when we look at in this, let me show you some of the skills, trades, and crafts we had in this country. All right, so you can research this yourself. And this is some of the information we cover in the online course that I teach. That's all on demand. Watch at your own pace. Go at your own pace. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So when we look at the book of The Other Slaves by James Newton and Ronald Lewis, we look at the 262 skills, trades, and crafts we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. We were anchor makers, artists, bakers, barrel makers, bartenders, basket makers, beer makers, blacksmiths, bricklayers, brick makers, cabinet makers, cigar makers, cooks, coppersmiths, decorative furnishers, fishermen, engineers, gardeners, hemp baggers, herb doctors, horse trainers, hunters, locksmiths. Okay, that's just a few. So what's going to happen is that after slavery ends, and now we can compete for these jobs, and our skills are as good as many white men, and in many cases better than white men, you're going to have these large labor unions that are going to be formed to protect these jobs, okay, for white men, okay? And they're going to have contracts with various industries. These labor unions have contracts with various industries saying that you can only hire white men that belong to certain unions, okay? And we're going to be locked out of these unions. So when you have European peasants coming to this country, immigrating to this country after slavery ends, not only are they going to be allowed not only are they going to be given land through things like the Homestead Act of 1862, which redistributed 250 million acres of land, okay? And then you have things like the Southern Homestead Act of 1866, which is going to redistribute 45 million acres of land, and African Americans are largely locked out of this, but also we're locked out of the trades. Now, we have been doing these jobs for basically free for 246 years, okay? Now we can compete for labor. Now these labor unions are created to lock us out of these jobs and lock us back into agriculture. And in many cases, the sharecropping system is going to lock us into labor contracts with the same plantations we were freed from, okay? And then we get locked out of the land distribution. And land was the foundation of freedom, all right? So we have to understand this history, understand this chronology of history, because this largely has to do with why African Americans only own 1.2% of the wealth today. And when you study the Homestead Act of 1862, and you can read How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. This is the second edition. The third edition is in my backpack because I took it with me to Atlanta. How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. Okay, when you read that book, and you read Black Label White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson also. But when you read this, you see how a sequence of historical events lead up to a larger event taking place, and you see the massive maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources, okay, and how that negativity impacts us today. All right, and I was trying to find the actual full list of 262 skills, trades, and crafts. I have it written down. Hold on, I saw it a little while ago because I was going through some of my files, and I saw it, and I don't know where the hell I put it. These are just some of the files and articles I have here at my desk. I have a couple of large crates full of file folders with hundreds of articles in them. This is research. Okay, I just want to find this. I don't know. I just saw it. I have to come back to it. All right. And this is in this stack right here that I was looking through. Let me find. How's everybody doing? All right, just give me a minute. I want to find this here because I just saw it. This is another stack of articles. So this is research. Where the hell? And I have a couple copies of it. All right. This is in this stack here. I think it's in this stack. Because oh, here we go. Yeah, I just saw it. All right, that's it right there. All right. Okay, so boatmen, bonnet pressers, bookbinders, boot blacks, which are shoe shine boys, shoe shine men, brakesmen, brass founders, bricklayers, brick makers, bridle makers, brush makers, they're in alphabetical order, butchers, cabinet makers, candle makers, carpenters, carpet cleaners, carvers, caterers, caulkers, chain makers, chair makers, chimney sweepers, clergymen, clerks, cloak makers, cloth makers, clothiers, cigar makers, coach painters, cobblers, coffin makers, collectors, confectioners, make candy, especially chocolate, cooks, coppersmiths, cotton gin makers, cotton gin, early 1790s, Eli Whitney, about 1792, 1793. Okay, and then you're going to have copies of the cotton gin as well. Cotton menders, but you need somebody to produce the cotton gins, right? Cracker bakers, people who bake crackers. Daguerreotypers. Okay, now the daguerreotype was the first photographic camera. It was created by John daguerreotype in the mid to late 1820s, around 1826, 1827. It's available for commercial usage in the 1830s, the daguerreotype. This is the first photographic camera, okay? So in the picture, the photograph that you see of the black John Hanson that a lot of people think was president, but was not president because there were two John Hanson. There was a white senator from Maryland named John Hanson who was president of the Continental Congress from 1781 to 1782, and he dies in 1783. Then there was the black John Hanson who was the senator to Liberia, whose picture is on the Library of Congress's website, okay? And Liberia wasn't founded till 1821 by the American Colonization Society. That photograph is circa around 1856 or so. That black and white photograph of the black John Hanson. That's a photograph. It's not a painting. Okay. The actual black and white photograph, that's a photograph taken with the daguerreotype. That's the first photographic camera. Okay. So he was not president. The black John Hanson was not president of the Continental Congress, right? The camera that took the photograph was invented about 40 years after the white John Hanson dies. So if he was president of the Continental Congress from 1781 to 1782, and you read his bio and do research, you find out he dies in 1783. Explain to me, how do you have a photograph of a man taken with a camera that was invented about 40 years after he died? I'll wait. I did the research on it, and I researched the history of photographic cameras, and I put together historical checkpoints. That's how I know that's how I know. And I did the research. There were two John Hansons. Okay. So these are some of the skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 up until 1865, right? So when slavery ends, now we can compete for jobs. Now we're going to be locked out of this and locked back into agriculture, okay? Because the South needs a labor force, okay? And they utilize the black codes to regulate the movements of the newly freed African Americans. And then they're going to use the sharecropping system and the convict leasing system to exploit our labor. This is what takes place. Okay, so let's continue. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also, okay? How you all like this type of information? Now, if we have any African-American business owners here, be sure to post the name of your business as well. We'll give you a shout out. And you want to register with the African History Network, okay? Because we put your 30 to 60 second commercial into the audio podcast of our radio shows. And we're on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Castbox, TuneIn.com, FM Player, Acast. We're across a number of different podcast platforms, reach thousands of people on a weekly basis. We have a special promotion: buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Okay. So email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com for more information. We'll talk about that. Okay. All right. Let's continue here. Okay. So Texas first leased out prisoners for caretaking on plantations, and later took over the land as state-run prison farms. Okay, said Ken Brown. Okay, Professor Ken Brown. All right, now Reginald Moore, who's a historian and prison reform advocate, who has studied convict leasing in the Houston area, he said it was, quote, more or less slavery by a new name. All right. Now, Reginald Moore noted that vagrancy laws, which comes from this part of the black codes, vagrancy laws at the time made it so that African Americans were often convicted of minor offenses such as loitering and sentenced to years of hard labor in the fields. White prisoners, he said, were often assigned easier work indoors. Now you're going to have some white people who are on the convict leasing system as well, okay? But in a lot of these southern states, from information I've seen, majority of them are going to be African American. Now, from 1870, which is still during Reconstruction, from 1870 to 1912, 60% of prisoners in Texas were African American. According to the Texas State Historical Association, from 1870, which is 5 years after slavery ends, 1870 to 1912, 60% of prisoners in Texas were African American. Now, during this time, prisoners helped build the Capitol building in Austin, Texas, and constructed part of the Texas State Railroad, okay? Part of the Texas State Railroad. And we know that when we look at information dealing with, this information came out when people were talking about slave labor building the White House, okay? Going back to about June of 2016 when Michelle Obama gave her speech at the Democratic National Convention. And she talked about waking up in a house built by slaves, all right? And immediately that night, there were, on social media, you had a lot of white people, not all white people, but you had a lot of white people going crazy. And they said she was lying and that the White House was not built by slaves, okay? Which is not true. So then you have articles being written, and I had some of them here. I got to find them. I have all these articles. But you had articles being written talking about and documenting how the White House and the U.S. Capitol building and other structures were built by slave labor. And the White House Historical Association, I think this is the, where is it? The White House Historical Association has a page that deals with slave labor building the White House. Slave labor building the White House, okay? I need to get another file folder. I mean, not file folder, file cabinet. I already have one file cabinet that's full. Then I have 2 crates full of file folders with articles in it. Then I have other stacks of file folders with articles in it. And I need another file cabinet. Okay, so if we look at, I think this was just the damn stack I was looking at today. And let me see, was this the one? There was, there are articles that deal with slave labor building the railroads, building the White House, building the U.S. Capitol building, things like that, okay? Where is, hold on, I had a file folder dealing with the presidents. And this is not it. I had all this stuff laid out. Now, where the hell? Oh, here it is right here. It's under my Black Panther book. Okay. Black Panther, the Ultimate Guide. So I have to do another presentation, tell you about my presentation at the Black Homeschooling Conference, because I dealt with lessons from the film Black Panther. Okay, so 6 historic structures in America that were built by slaves, from theroot.com, June 26, 2016. I think that article was written the night of the Democratic National Convention, and or maybe the next day, because it looks like that was July 26th. So it looks like it was July 25th, right? So PolitiFact.com had an article, Michelle Obama correct that the White House was built by slaves. Michelle Obama correct that the White House was built by slaves, okay? And they talk about how the White House Historical Association, a private preservation and educational group for the presidential residence complex, has a webpage devoted to the question, did slaves build the White House? It reads in part, construction of the president's house began in 1792 in Washington, D.C. So George Washington did not live in the White House in Washington, D.C. He lived in Philadelphia, okay? The White House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The first president to live in the White House in Washington, D.C. was John Adams, who was the second president. And it was still under construction, partly, when he moves in. Now, a new capital, so construction of the president's house began in 1792 in Washington, D.C., a new capital situated in a sparsely settled region far from a major popular center. The decision to place the capital on land ceded by 2 slave states, Virginia and Maryland, ultimately influenced the acquisition of laborers to construct its public buildings, okay? So you can check out that article. That's from PolitiFact.com. The actual page from the White House Historical Association is called "Did Slaves Build the White House?" Did slaves build the White House? And they talk about how, however, response to, the DC commissioners charged by Congress with building the new city, Washington, D.C., under the direction of the president, initially planned to import workers initially planned to import workers from Europe to meet their labor needs. They were going to get some immigrants. I wonder if they were documented or undocumented. I'm not sure. But they were going to get some immigrants. However, response to recruitment was dismal. And soon they turned to African Americans, enslaved and free, to provide the bulk of the labor that built the White House, the United States Capitol building, and other early government buildings. Now, this is the White House Historical Association breaking this down, okay? So what happened was, all this came about because of what Michelle Obama said July 25th, 2016 at the Democratic National Convention. And then on social media, it went crazy. A lot of white people, not all white people, but a lot of white people on social media said she was lying. Now, wait a second. This was televised live. Many of you all saw it. I watched it, right? Those were the good old days. Because this fool right here, this fool is a traitor. I told you all back during the election that Russia, I told you that Donald Trump, number one, was in bed with Russia. Told you they had some stuff on him. And this dude right here, oh, he's going down. I'm telling you. This dude right here is going down. And probably the reason why Mueller has not subpoenaed Trump is because Trump is a target. See, last we heard Trump was a subject. If you watch The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell tonight, he interviewed a guy who's a veteran of the Department of Justice. And he said, in my 30-year career with the Department of Justice, I've never seen a target of an investigation subpoenaed and brought before a grand jury. He said, now I would not be surprised if Trump is a target of the investigation, okay? Especially if you look at the article that came out from the New York Times on July 18th, Wednesday, July 18th. From the start, Trump has muddied a clear message. Putin interfered. From the start, Trump has muddied a clear message. Putin interfered. You have to read this article from the New York Times, okay? Because what this article breaks down is that on January 6, 2017, it says here that 2 weeks before his inauguration, on January 6, 2018, Donald Trump was shown highly classified intelligence indicating that President Vladimir Putin of Russia had personally ordered complex cyber attacks to sway the 2016 American election, okay? Who was in this meeting? FBI Director James Comey, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, CIA Director James Brennan. They were in this meeting briefing him. This was January 6, 2017, 2 weeks before the January 20th, 2017 inauguration. And this fool for a year has acted like he didn't know anything. No. The evidence included texts and emails from Russian military officers and information gleaned from a top secret source close to Mr. Putin, who had described to the CIA how the Kremlin decided to execute its campaign of hacking and disinformation. Donald Trump sounded grudgingly convinced, according to several people who attended the intelligence briefing. But ever since, Trump has tried to cloud the very clear findings that he received on January 6, 2017, which his own intelligence leaders have unanimously endorsed. So this fool, this traitor, this con man, this fraud, this traitor-in-chief has known. He was shown overwhelming evidence since January 6, 2017, that Vladimir Putin ordered complex cyber attacks to sway this 2016 election. He didn't order them to sway it in Hillary Clinton's favor. He ordered them to sway them in Donald Trump's favor. This fool has known this since January 6, 2017, and he wants to sit here and act like he's clueless. Okay? No, he's going down. That is, dude, this, I guarantee you, he's guilty of obstruction of justice. Okay? I guarantee you, Trump is guilty of obstruction of justice. It's not treason because we're not at war with Russia. If we were at war with Russia, it could probably be considered treason based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. The shifting narrative underscores the degree to which Trump regularly picks and chooses intelligence to suit his political purposes. That has never been more clear than this week. All this stuff came out this week. This fool's going down. Okay? On Monday, standing next to the Russian president in Helsinki, Finland, Trump said he accepted Vladimir Putin's denial of Russian election intrusions. By Tuesday, faced with a bipartisan political outcry from Republicans and Democrats, Trump sought to walk back his words and sided with his intelligence agencies. But this traitor has known since January 6, 2017. He was briefed by intelligence officials, by James Clapper, who at the time was the director of the National Intelligence, by John Brennan, who at the time was director of the CIA, by FBI Director James Comey, who Trump fired May 9th, 2017, and said it was because of the Russian investigation. When he was interviewed May 11th, 2017, by Lester Holt on NBC, he said, you know, this Russia thing, this Russia thing is a hoax, okay? And he said he fired Comey because of that. He incriminated himself. Trump knows the Russia investigation is not a hoax. Trump has known since January 6, 2017, that Vladimir Putin personally ordered complex cyber attacks to sway the 2016 American election. He's a traitor. He's a fraud. He's a con man. But I told you this during the election. People didn't want to listen to him. People didn't want to listen. So you got to read this article, New York Times. From the start, Trump has muddied a clear message. Putin interfered. So then the day the story came out, Hill.com reported that former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, confirmed that he was in this meeting and that Trump was shown overwhelming evidence that Vladimir Putin ordered the complex cyber attacks to sway the 2016 election. So now you see why there has not been any large major measures taken to protect the November 6th midterm elections from it, because everybody from DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, everybody from FBI Director Christopher Wray, and others who head up the intelligence agencies, they're saying the Russians have not left. They're still meddling. If we look today, I posted this article on my personal page, MSN.com. We'll get back to this in just a minute, but this is extremely important because all this is going on. All this is going on around us, and many of our people are clueless. The Hill.com reported, Microsoft exposes effort to interfere in the midterm elections. Okay, so the White House announced today that Vladimir Putin is going to make a visit to the White House in Washington, D.C. this fall. If somebody breaks into your house, you don't invite them to dinner. Okay, Donald Trump is a traitor. Russia has, and people speculate what it is. It's a number of things. A lot of it, I think, is dealing with financial dealings. Russia has leverage over Trump, incriminating information, leverage over Trump that he does not want to get exposed, and they're using that leverage to control Trump's actions. This is what's taking place. This is what I warn people about. People ain't want to listen. During the 2016 election cycle, I warn people about this. Microsoft discloses first known hacking attempts in midterm elections. What's the date of this article? July 19, 2018. This is breaking news. Microsoft disclosed on Thursday, July 19, 2018, that it identified and helped thwart hacking attempts on 3 congressional candidates earlier this year, marking the first publicly known hacking efforts targeting candidates in the 2018 midterm elections. Now, Tom Burt, B-U-R-T, Microsoft's Vice President for Security and Trust, said at the Aspen Security Forum, that's where DNI Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats was speaking today, and also yesterday, FBI Director Christopher Wray was interviewed by Lester Holt of NBC, the Aspen Security Forum. Tom Burt said, earlier this year, we did discover that a fake Microsoft domain had been established as the landing page for phishing attacks. He said, and we saw metadata that suggested those phishing attacks were being directed at 3 candidates who are all standing for election in the midterm elections. Now, Tom Burt said that Microsoft and the government were able to take the domain down and block the phishing messages. The executives did not disclose the names of the candidates targeted, but said they were, quote, people who, because of their positions, might have been interesting targets from an espionage standpoint, as well as election disruption standpoint, end quote. Now, hackers used a similar strategy to make their way into Democratic National Committee servers in 2016. Tom Burt did not specify if Microsoft believed the hackers were Russian. He did, however, say that analysts had reported fewer instances of Russian hacking attempts than in 2016. He did, however, say that analysts had reported fewer instances of Russian hacking attempts than in 2016. Quote, the consensus of the threat intelligence community right now is that we're not seeing the same level of activity by the Russian activity groups, end quote, he said. Quote, we don't see the activity of them trying to infiltrate think tanks and academia and in social networks to do the research that they do to build the phishing attacks, end quote. Tom Burt noted, though, quote, that does not mean we're not going to see it. There's a lot of time left before the election, end quote. Midterm election, November 6, 2018. This article just came out today. Okay, check this out, thehill.com. And then also you need to read this article from New York Times. New York Times broke this story yesterday evening. From the start, Trump has muddied a clear message. Putin interfered, July 18, 2018, New York Times. And let me get this, here we go. Here's the link. Because I have about 60 tabs open in Firefox. So I have to look at all this. Okay. How's everybody doing? See, I study a number of different topics and disciplines, not just history. This is damaging here. This article from the New York Times, this is damaging. It exposes Trump as a traitor, but I already told you he was one. Okay, so let's continue here. All right, so USA Today had an article from February 21st, 2002. February 21st, 2002. Rail networks own lines built with slave labor. RAIL, the railroads. Rail networks own lines built with slave labor, okay? And they talk about how North America's 4 major rail networks or railroad networks, Norfolk Southern, CSX, Union Pacific, and Canadian National, all own rail lines that were built and operated with slave labor. This is USA Today, February 21st, 2002. Historians say nearly every rail line built east of the Mississippi River and south of the Mason-Dixon line before the Civil War, 1861, was constructed or run at least partly by slaves. Okay, so let's continue with this article from the New York Times dealing with remains of Black people forced into labor after slavery are discovered in Texas. All right, all this deals with history. So from 1870 to 1912, 60% of prisoners in Texas were African American, according to the Texas State Historical Association. During this time, prisoners helped build the Capitol building in Austin, Texas, and constructed part of the Texas State Railroad. All right, we just talked about the railroads. All this, you know, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. Okay, so when these historical events take place, when these archaeological discoveries are made, it ties into a whole sequence of historical events. All right, we just posted the link again. So if you like this type of information, be sure to register for the online courses that I teach. They're all on demand. We have a 10-course bundle pack on sale, $60, regularly $130. It includes ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Afua, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It's all on demand. Watch from around the world. So today, the Fort Bend Independent School District is building a technical high school on the site of a former sugar plantation that later served as a state-run prison farm. Okay, it was originally a sugar plantation and then became a state-run prison farm. After construction, workers spotted human bones in February of 2018. Archaeologists eventually discovered the cemetery on the site, according to court records. Now, in June of 2018, a judge granted permission to exhume the remains. So far, the results show that the men who were buried there lived difficult lives, researchers said. Their bones show stress from poor health during childhood, such as fever and malnutrition, and stress from repetitive work later in life. Okay, now Katrina Banks Whitley is a bioarchaeologist. I don't even know what that is. A bioarchaeologist who was analyzing the bones. And she said they were really doing a lot of heavy labor from the time they were young. I guess that's a combination between an archaeologist and a biologist. Now, because of that, she said, it is possible that some were former slaves. Now, Mr. Moore, Reginald Moore, who is a historian and prison reform advocate who has studied convict leasing in the Houston area, he said that, the discovery was particularly gratifying to Reginald Moore, who lives nearby and had long suspected such graves might be hidden there at this site. He has been fighting for recognition for African American convict laborers whose role in Texas history, he said, has been mostly forgotten. He said he hoped the new findings would encourage Texas to remember them and include their stories in history books and memorials. He said, quote, "When I went out there and seen those bodies, I felt so elated that they would finally get their justice. It was overwhelming for me. I almost fainted." Okay, so check out this article from New York Times. Remains of Black people forced into labor after slavery are discovered in Texas. This is written by Sarah Mervosh Mervosh. Published July 18th, 2018. Okay, New York Times. And we'll post the link here. And then also AtlantaBlackStar.com picked up this story as well. July 18th by Tenacia Kinney. Mass grave containing nearly 100 black bodies unearthed on Texas construction site. Okay, mass grave containing nearly 100 black bodies unearthed on Texas construction site. And they also cited an article from CBS News that stated the remains are thought to be those of black prisoners dating back over a century. Local historian Reginald Moore said he believes that a mix of prisoners and sugarcane plantation workers are buried beneath the community of Sugarland, Texas. Sugarland, Texas. I wonder why it's called Sugarland. Probably because it was sugar plantations there, sugarcane plantations. He said the enslaved workers were likely tied to the land by plantation owners that paid Texas for labor contracts after slavery ended. Okay. So check out that article from AtlantaBlackStar.com as well. Now, if we go back to the article from PBS.org, convict leasing, under the category slavery by another name, convict leasing, dealing with the convict leasing system from 1865 to 1928. It talks about how previously African American, let's go to this article here where we have it. Okay. So it talks about how initially some states paid private contractors to house and feed the prisoners. Within a few years, states realized they could lease out their convicts to local planters or industrialists who would pay minimal rates for the workers and be responsible for their housing and feeding, thereby eliminating costs and increasing revenue. Soon, markets for convict laborers developed with entrepreneurs buying and selling convict labor leases. Unlike slavery, employers had only a small capital investment in convict laborers and little incentive to treat them well. So convict leasing system in many ways was worse than slavery. The slave owner had more of an investment in the slaves, especially if they were with the slave master from like birth. Okay, there's more of a capital investment in it. So even though slaves largely were treated badly, in general, they were treated better than on the convict leasing system. Convict laborers were often dismally treated, but the convict lease system was hugely profitable for the states and the employers. As public sympathy grew toward the plight of convict laborers, Southern states struggled over what to do. The loss of revenue was significant, and the cost of housing convicts high. Eventually, many Southern states stopped leasing out their convict laborers, instead keeping them to work on public projects in chain gangs. So the convict leasing system is going to give way to the chain gangs. And we've all heard the song by Sam Cooke, okay? That's the sound of the men working on the chain gangs. Now, there's an article from timeline.com. The Southern program continued slavery long after the Civil War. This Southern program continued slavery long after the Civil War. And this is about the convict leasing system, okay? Convicts often ended up working for their old masters. And they deal with the convict leasing system, but they deal with how the convict leasing system or why it ended, okay? And they talk about how for Southern whites, now without the former workforce of the slaves, there was a clear upside to convicting as many blacks as possible. Laws, especially around vagrancy, were quickly enacted to target African Americans. Okay, in North Carolina, for instance, people without jobs could be sent to court. People without jobs could be sent to court. If they could pay a fine, they were dismissed for a year. Okay. If not, they were deemed a vagrant and imprisoned. Now, newly freed slaves came with a clause, however, they must return to their former masters under contract or be leased to a corporation for hard labor. Now, after vagrancy laws were in place, a system called convict leasing emerged across the South. In 1883, 10% of Alabama's revenue came from the labor of convicts. 10% of Alabama's revenue in 1883 came from the labor of convicts. By 1898, 73% of the revenue of Alabama came from the labor of convicts. Entrepreneurs began buying and selling convict labor leases for a profit, kind of like the privatized prisons you have today, like Core Civic, which used to be Corrections Corporation of America, which is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. The stock exchange symbol is CXW. Okay, they used to be Corrections Corporation of America. Now they're called Core Civic. All right, now by 1898, it had reached 73%. Entrepreneurs began buying and selling convict labor leases for profit. As the money-making potential increased, the incentive to arrest blacks and poor whites, of course, grew. As the money-making potential increased, the incentive to arrest African Americans and poor whites grew. Officials claimed black convicts were better off in this kind of servitude than as free men. All right. And during slavery, the South claimed that enslaved Africans were better off in slavery than they were free. Okay, because it was the South that created this image of the happy slave, and they said that the system of slavery provided food and clothing and shelter for the slaves, and the slave master took care of them. And you had this myth of the benevolent slave master, and the enslaved Africans were portrayed as being extensions of the family or part of the family. All right, so they create this myth of the happy slave, and this is used to justify slavery, especially as you have an increase in the abolitionist movement, like in 1852 when Harriet Beecher Stowe comes out with her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which really exposes America to the horrors of slavery. And 1854 when you have the Republican Party that's founded March of 1854 as a direct result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which dealt with which gave sovereignty to Western states and Western territories to determine whether or not they wanted to have slavery in these Western territories, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. You have the Underground Railroad that's founded right around 1831. Okay, so as the abolitionist movement gains momentum and increases, you're going to have the southern states, the southern slaveholding states, to fight even harder to justify slavery. Okay, so officials claim that black convicts were better off in this kind of servitude than as free men. There they would be shed of their old habits by learning a trade. They would leave prison having been exposed to quote unquote rigid discipline and regular hours. So they're really trying to sell the benefits of this convict leasing system. Oh, it's like the army, you're going to learn skills, and, you're going to do more before 6 a.m. than most people do all day. You could be all you can be in the convict leasing system. You're going to learn a trade, all of this, right? But there was little incentive to treat convicts well once they were leased out to work on a plantation or in a mine, a coal mine. Okay. I'm not saying the army is like being in the convict leasing system. All right. I'm just drawing an analogy. Okay. So after all, the lessers, after all, the lessers had little, or leasers had little interest in the convict's long-term health, and by law were no longer entitled to their offspring. All right. So convict death rates were 10 times higher in states that had the convict lease programs. In 1873, 25% of Black convicts died. Secret graveyards were common. Okay, like the one that was discovered there in Sugar Land, Texas. So defenders of the convict leasing system praised the vast, inexpensive pool of workers that the system provided. After all, these laborers could not strike. They couldn't go on strike or petition for raises. Okay, they didn't have minimum wage for them. They didn't have a union for those on the convict leasing system. But ironically, now this is why it ended. Okay, ironically, it was the very cheapness of the labor that helped end the convict leasing system. Unionized white workers, white men, unionized white workers eventually got tired of being undercut when it came to the laborers on the convict leasing system doing jobs for pennies on the dollar. Okay. In Tennessee, unionized white men stormed the stockades. They freed the prisoners who were to replace them and loaded them on trains bound for distant cities. So the convict leasing system provided a cheap labor force. It was undercutting jobs of white unionized working men. So they said it's got to go. And when you look at some of the abolitionists during slavery, you're going to have some abolitionists who felt that slavery was morally wrong. Okay, you're going to have other abolitionists who either felt it was morally wrong or didn't feel it was morally wrong, but they realized that the slaves were doing the jobs of white men for free. So they said you have to end slavery. All right. Now, what's interesting, and Tim Wise has talked about this, anti-racist advocate and expert. Tim Wise has talked about this. Tim Wise has talked about when you look at the Civil War, when you look at the South, the 11 states that secede from the Union, starting with South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. When they fight in the Civil War, right? The majority of the Southerners who were fighting were not the rich plantation owners who owned slaves. The majority of now you're gonna have a few of them that do fight, but the majority of the plantation owners, the majority of the Southerners who fight in the Civil War are poor whites. So he asked the question, well, how did the rich Southern plantation owner who owned slaves convince the poor whites to go risk their lives and go fight in the Civil War to maintain slavery? And most of these poor whites didn't own slaves. The way they were able to do it is the wealthy plantation owners told the poor whites that if the slaves are free, they're going to take your jobs. The poor whites didn't realize the slaves were already doing your jobs and they were doing it for free. But because they didn't realize this, they go fight for the rich plantation owner who owns slaves, and they go risk their lives to maintain slavery. And most of them didn't even own slaves. They were told that if the slaves are free, the slaves are going to take your jobs. But they didn't realize the slaves were already doing your job. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. The slaves were already doing the jobs. They were doing it for free. So when we look at what ends the convict leasing system, right? If we look at Florida, the state of Florida, you have a story of a white man named Martin Tabert, T-A-B-E-R-T, or Tabert. And this story of him hits the newspapers, and it brings about an outcry, and it brings the atrocities of the convict leasing system to the public, okay? So when he was 22 years old, he leaves North Dakota, his home in North Dakota, to travel the country. In December of 1921, he arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, where he hopped a train and was arrested for vagrancy, okay? This is a white male. The court sentenced Tabor to 60 days in the county jail, where he shoveled swamp mud in hip-deep water for 15 hours a day. Okay? He's sentenced to 60 days in county jail. He shoveled swamp mud in hip-deep water for 16 hours a day. Within 2 months, Martin Tabor, this white male, was starved and weak. Barely able to work, he was beaten with a 7-pound strap until his back, quote, was all scabs and cuts from his shoulders to his knees, end quote. So he's going to die from this, right? His parents were informed via letter that their son died of a fever. No, his son's probably whipped to death and worked to death. So news of Martin Tabor's death hit the front pages of the newspapers. And Florida outlawed the convict leasing system of county prisoners in 1923, okay? 5 years later, 1928, Alabama was the last state to end the convict leasing system. So because of the undercutting of wages of white unionized men by these prisoners on the convict leasing system, largely African-American men, and because of the mistreatment of them, you're going to see the convict leasing system phased out, but it's going to give way to the chain gangs. Now, some states simply move convicts into prisons and assign them instead to public works projects. For instance, the Tennessee Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, which forced prisoners to work an on-site coal mine, generated significant profits and operated until 1966. Okay? And you're gonna and we're gonna see in a lot of these states the convict leasing system give way to the chain gangs. All right. Now, there was an article from AtlantaBlackStar.com, September 3rd, 2016. America's private prison industry was born from the exploitation of the slave trade. America's private prison industry was born from the exploitation of the slave trade. This was written by David Love, September 3rd, 2016. He said that private prisons, those for-profit correctional facilities owned by corporations rather than the government, have their origin in the slave trade. The Federal Bureau of Prisons recently decided to phase out its contracts with private prisons due to safety issues, as the Department of Homeland Security is now reviewing the fate of privately run immigration centers. Now, this is 2 years ago, okay? Now, this was the Obama administration in August of 2016. President Obama said that they were not going to renew prison contracts with privatized prisons for federal prisoners. They were also, and they were trying to determine, at the time they said they were going to still use them for immigration detention centers, but they were reevaluating that. Trump has reversed that. Trump has reversed that. See, when Trump came to office, he said they were going to renew the contracts with privatized prisons. Why? Because Core Civic, which used to be Corrections Corporation of America, and Geo Group, these are two of the largest owner-operators of privatized prisons. Okay, they donated almost $600,000 to the Donald Trump campaign. See, this is what I warn people about. People ain't want to listen to me. All right, this is what I warn people about. And then if we look at who's making money from detaining immigrants, right? Look who has the contracts. Now, this is $1 billion industry, having contracts detaining immigrants. And let me see, where's my article on that? And we see that Core Civic and also, I think it's right here. We see that Core Civic and Geo Group have contracts detaining immigrants. All right. Wall Street Journal, July 2nd, 2018. Trump's immigrant detention plans benefit private prison operators. Isn't that something? Trump's immigrant detention plans benefit private prison operators. Core Civic and Geo Group, both Trump campaign contributors, have become more reliant on ICE revenue in recent years. Tennessee-based Core Civic Inc. and Florida-based Geo Group had already been helped by higher federal spending on immigration and customs enforcement, ICE. Now, the Trump administration is seeking $2.8 billion in the 2019 budget year to increase the number of beds in immigration detention centers to 52,000, which includes 49,500 adults and 2,500 family beds, from about 40,000 now, a spokeswoman said. Stock shares in both companies, Core Civic and Geo Group, rose last month, month of June 2018, after ICE issued a notice that it may seek 15,000 new beds for families. So you have to read the rest of this article. Trump's immigration detention plans benefit private prison operators. Then we look at this other article from New York Times, June 21st, 2018. The billion-dollar business of operating shelters for migrant children. I mean, people are making money off of detaining these migrant children. The business of housing, transporting, and watching over migrant children detained along the southwest border is not a multi-million-dollar business. It's a billion-dollar business. The nonprofit organization Southwest Key Programs has won at least $955 million in federal contracts since 2015 to run shelters and provide other services to immigrant children in federal custody. Its shelter for migrant boys at a former Walmart supercenter in South Texas has been the focus of nationwide scrutiny, but Southwest Key is but one player in the lucrative, secretive world of the migrant shelter business. About a dozen contractors operate more than 30 facilities in Texas alone, with numerous others contracted for about 100 shelters in 16 other states. Read this article. This is just a sample. This article, 6 pages. I don't have time to get through all of it. The billion-dollar business of operating shelters for migrant children. New York Times, June 21st, 2018, written by Manny Fernandez and Katie Benner. So then we look at June 5th, 2018, Vox.com, VOX. Trump keeps making it harder for people to seek asylum legally. See, seeking political asylum is legal. That's based upon international treaties that the U.S. helped to draft. It's legal to seek asylum at an official border crossing. But border agents are blocking people from getting that far. So then that they can be put in detention centers like the ones ran by Core Civic and Geo Group. Interesting. The Trump administration justifies its zero tolerance policy of prosecuting everyone who crosses the U.S. illegally, including asylum-seeking parents who are separated from their children, by being placed in criminal jails, by saying that people who want asylum should seek it the right way, quote unquote. by presenting themselves at an official port of entry into the U.S., like an official road checkpoint at the U.S.-Mexico border, rather than coming into the country illegally between checkpoints. But some immigrants who try to seek asylum the right way are being turned away and told there's no room for them now. And there's evidence that border agents are physically blocking some asylum seekers from setting foot on U.S. soil. In other words, from triggering a legal right to claim asylum in the U.S. to begin with. This is why the United Nations came out about 4 weeks ago and said the Trump administration is in violation of international law. Because seeking political asylum is international law. That's not illegal. All right. So how's everybody doing? All right, so those just joining us, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. We were talking about the story from the New York Times about remains of African Americans forced into labor after slavery was discovered in Sugar Land, Texas. This is a huge story. Many of you saw articles about this. You saw us post about this on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. And that ties into the history of slavery, the Civil War, prison industrial complex, privatized prisons, and in detaining the billion-dollar industry of operating shelters for migrant children as well. All right, so who do we have here? And if you are an African-American business owner, be sure to post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. And you can advertise with the African History Network. We have a special promotion. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com for more information. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We have a special promotion. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free for limited time only because we have a few slots left. We the weekly radio show we do in our other podcasts, we upload that. We put that in podcast form on Blog Talk Radio and Castbox and iTunes and TuneIn.com and FM Player. So we have thousands of people who listen to each one of our podcasts, okay? And we plug your 60-second commercial into that. If you don't have a commercial, we'll make one for you, all right? Special promotion, buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Let's look at some of your comments here. All right, this is the first time I've been able to broadcast since I got back from Atlanta as well. Okay, from the Black Homeschooling Conference. Susan said it still is, isn't it, Willie? Now may they rest in peace. Timeline.com. Yeah, the article from Timeline.com dealing with the convict leasing system. Where's that article? This Southern program continued slavery long after the Civil War. Okay, that's from Timeline.com. All right, let's post the link here. Timeline.com has some really, really good articles dealing with history. Okay, let's see here. Then I'll do a brief overview of the online course that I teach, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach in school. How you all like this type of information? Heather said, excellent work. This is some powerful information, brother. Thanks for your hard work. Marcella said, all right. Also, if you like, forgot to tell you, if you like this type of information, you want to support the African History Network, you can donate to the African History Network. PayPal.me/the AHN show. That helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, pay the bills. PayPal.me/the AHN show. Okay. If you want to donate, you can donate there. They got played. How ironic. I think she's talking about the poor whites who fought in the Civil War on behalf of the South. Okay. Private prison industry born after. Susan said, don't be surprised. Katrina said, this is crazy. See, remember the immigrants came over here taking jobs with very low wages. Look at the outcome. Um, it's wrong to look at immigrants as taking jobs with very low wages. See, what people fail to understand is that white supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight each other. So you have people who say that immigrants are taking our jobs. At the same time, number one, you have 6.7 million unfilled jobs in this country. You have a record number of unfilled jobs in this country right now. Go to BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, read the unemployment rates, read the unemployment reports, okay? You have 6.7 million unfilled jobs. Now, what people don't do is go after the people who are paying the low wages to the immigrants. It's not like the immigrants hire themselves. See, people are not going after the corporations and the companies and the farmers who hire the undocumented immigrants and pay them low wages. They go after the undocumented immigrants who are being oppressed and being taken advantage of, and then they say, "Oh, they're taking our jobs." Well, no. Number one, you got unemployment rate among African Americans is about 5.8%. Lowest has been in damn near since been recorded since about 1972 or so. And that's U3 number. U6 number is higher because there's 6 different unemployment rates, U1 through U6. Overall unemployment rate is about 4%. This is a continuation of policies from President Obama, by the way, because under President Obama, the unemployment rate was cut in half, by more than half, for African Americans. About August of 2011, it was about 16.8%, dropped down to 7.8% by December 2016. Okay, so the other thing is, and I wrote an article about this. I wrote an article about this, debunking the myth of immigrants taking jobs or something. I have to look it up. I forgot the name of it. I've written over 60 articles. I forgot the name of this. But what happens is one, people don't go after the people hiring the immigrants and undocumented immigrants and paying them lower wages. They don't go after them. They just blame the people being oppressed and people being taken advantage of. Okay. Two, nobody says, wait a second, you have 6.7 million unfilled jobs. So what are you talking about? So what Trump did during the campaign is Trump engaged in the othering of other people. And he talked about Mexicans taking the jobs and Hispanics taking the jobs. And this played into the fear of the browning of America. Because white people have a negative birth rate in 26 states out of 50. If we look at the information that came out June 21st, 2018, right? New York Times, June 20th, 2018. Fewer births than deaths among whites in majority of U.S. cities. Fewer births than deaths among whites in majority of U.S. cities. The Census Bureau has projected that whites could drop below 50% of the population around 2045, a relatively slow change, a relatively slow moving change that has been years in the making. But a new report this week found that whites are dying faster than they are being born now in 26 states out of 50. This is up from 17 states just 2 years earlier, as demographers say that shift might come even sooner. So what this means is that white people are dying faster in 26 states out of 50 than they're being born. A lot of this has to do with the opioid crisis. Just 2 years ago, they had a negative birth rate in 17 states out of 50. Now it's 26 states out of 50. So there's a fear by some white people, not all white people, but there's a fear by some white people of the browning of America. And that by 2043, 2045, they will not be a numerical majority anymore. And there's a lot of fear about what's going to happen. MSN.com reported June 21st, 2018 in an article entitled America's White Population Shrinks for the First Time as Nation Ages. And they talk about how the data show the nation's white population is aging rapidly as Americans delay their decision to have a family and as the flow of foreign immigrants from European countries declines or ebbs. Wasn't it Donald Trump, January 8th, 2018, in the meeting about DACA, who said, why do we have, he referred to African nations, Haiti and El Salvador, as S-hole countries, and said, why don't we have more immigrants coming from nations like Norway, European nations? You have a declining amount of foreign immigrants coming from white nations. At the same time, minority populations are growing much faster, hastening or speeding up a demographic shift that has been decades in the making. Do you understand this has a big bearing on the political landscape? When it comes to voting, this is something that Stacey Abrams is talking about in the state of Georgia, who's the Democratic nominee for governor of the state of Georgia. She's talking about demographic changes in the state of Georgia and changes in the racial makeup of the state of Georgia. The average non-Hispanic white American is 43 and a half years old. The average non-Hispanic white American, so the average white American, 43 and a half years old, according to new data. The average Hispanic American, by contrast, is 29.3 years old. So you literally have some people scared to death. And what Trump did not do is talk about how automation, robotics, and software programs are taking people's jobs. See, he didn't tell you that factory output has doubled since the 1980s, but they're doing it with 1/3 the labor force. He blamed Hispanics and Mexicans for taking jobs. No. I mean, some are shipped overseas, yeah, sure. But no, it's a lot are being eliminated by automation, robotics, software programs. But Trump blames Mexicans for it and demonizes them, calls them rapists and murderers, things like this. This is the same game that was being played on poor whites during the Civil War, and the wealthy white plantation owners who owned the slaves convinced the poor whites to go fight in the Civil War and risk their lives to save the South and keep slavery intact. And most of these poor whites didn't even own slaves because they were told if the slaves are free, they're going to take your jobs. The slaves are already doing your job, dumbass, and they were doing it for free. It's the same game being ran on. But when people don't understand history, right, then they could be taken advantage of. Why the fear of brown America? That's how it was in the beginning. Well, the fear, because you have some white people who fear becoming a numerical minority because they know historically they have mistreated numerical minorities, and they fear that what they did to other people will come back and be done to them. Now, this is not all white people, but you have some that have this fear because they know they have mistreated other people, and they know what goes around comes around. They fear universal law called karma. Okay, so this is what many of them, some of them, have a fear of. Okay. Heather said, I'm in Atlanta, I'm voting for Stacey Abrams. That's a bad sister right there, Stacey Abrams. Dupree said, so he lied about the stealing a job. Yes. He didn't deal with automation and he didn't talk about that. How automation is taking away jobs. He said he's going to bring back the coal jobs. Coal jobs are not coming back. What are you talking about? Instead of talking about retraining, he lied to him and said, I'm going to bring back the coal jobs. And he said, we're going to have clean coal. There's no such thing. What are you talking about? This is a con man. Okay? All right. Okay, so let me deal briefly here with the online courses I teach. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach in school. How y'all like this type of information? Okay, so if you like this type of information, you definitely like the online course that I teach. So I deal with history chronologically as much as possible. You can deal with it episodically, deal with it as an episode in history, or you can deal with it chronologically. Okay, I deal with it chronologically. Here we go. Let's look at some of the things that we deal with, right? So we deal with thousands of years of history. Now, Kemet is one of the original names of Egypt, okay? We call it Egypt. Today it's called Egypt, the Arab Republic of Egypt. That's what Arabs will call it, okay? But Kemet is one of the original names, means land of the blacks, okay? This is some of the language that Trump uses, specifically talking about undocumented immigrants. He uses terms infest, thugs, infiltrate, killers, criminals, under siege, massive crime, crime infested, breeding, pour into our country. Okay. This is some of the language he uses to demonize them, to then justify the mistreatment of them. All right. So we deal with what was the transatlantic slave trade? What were some of the events that led up to the transatlantic slave trade starting? What role did Christopher Columbus play? Because you have to understand Christopher Columbus and his 4 voyages to understand the transatlantic slave trade. And I show you where Columbus went on his 4 voyages, because he never came to the land we call the United States of America. Closest he comes here is Cuba, which is 90 miles away, okay? When did Africans first come to the U.S. as slaves? Did Africans sell themselves into slavery? We deal with that complicated history, because it's not exactly as the way it's being portrayed. Were African people in America before the slave trade? Yes, we were. This actually was our land stolen from us. We were here going back at least 51,700 years ago. But also, if we look at enslaved Africans, we know that the Spanish were enslaving Africans in South Carolina going back to the 1520s. The Spanish were enslaving Africans in South Carolina going back to the 1520s, okay? This is 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything, insurance companies that took out policies on slave ships and enslaved Africans on plantations, Freemasonry, America and the Founding Fathers, the origins of the term America and Africa. That's some deep history there as well. The problems with slave movies, while we're being bombarded with slave movies and a slave-themed TV show, Underground, which has since been canceled. The first Holy Trinity, or in the early stories of the Immaculate Conception, Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Some of this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Does not mean it's not true. This means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Links to ancient Kemet, Egypt, and early Christianity, Freemasonry in America, and the fake Willie Lynch letter of 1712. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Just like the Black John Hanson was not president. Take that garbage and throw it in the garbage can, all right? These are some of the things we deal with. Dr. David Imhotep wrote the book, who's a friend of mine. He wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He deals with the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. We see the discovery from Allendale County, South Carolina, discovered by archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear, who's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. We see they discovered in 2004 at a campsite in Allendale County, South Carolina. They found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups, dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, painting, skulls, skeleton structures, and tools. 13 different disciplines thoroughly documenting an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. These were the Khoisan. Khoisan have the oldest DNA on the planet. They come from Southern Africa, ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. Twa are derisively called pygmies in anthropology and archaeology. But the Khoisan go all around the world, okay? And they were in this land we call the United States of America. This is an article from ScienceDaily.com, November 18, 2004, called New Evidence Puts Man in North America, 50,000 years. 50,000 years ago. New evidence puts man in North America 50,000 years ago. And a synopsis of this article. So this deals with Dr. Albert Goodyear's discovery. Synopsis of this article, or summary, says, radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments contained these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. Meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age, okay? So we deal with a chronology of history, do with some archaeological discoveries as well, like the lost city of Heraclion, lost city of Egypt, which was said to be swallowed up by the sea about 1,200 years ago. Okay, lost city of Egypt, Thomas Heraclion. And then we deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who lose control. You know, they go into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, 711 AD. And they take the teachings from ancient Kemet, okay, take the teachings from ancient Kemet into Europe. And these are going to be the teachings that bring Europe out of the Dark Ages, okay? And let me post a link here on the thread of the broadcast for the online course as well, okay? It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Afua, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It's a 10-course online bundle pack. This is one of the courses in the bundle pack. It's a 14-hour, 7-session online course. Also, the bundle pack includes Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, African-American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. It includes an online class I did dealing with the film Black Panther as well. So the 10-course online bundle pack is on sale $60, regularly $130. It's all on demand. And it includes Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? So you can click on the link there or go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and you can register there. As soon as you register, you can start watching. You can watch from around the world. All right, so when we look at the Washington Monument, which is 555 feet tall, right? This comes out of Freemasonry, okay? And the Greeks call it an obelisk, but it's originally called a tekhen. There were about 1,200 tekhenu throughout ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Today, there are only about 12. They've been taken to other cities like Istanbul, Turkey, and Vatican City, Rome, you know, things like this, Paris, France, okay? But the foundations of Freemasonry come from the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, taken into Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. So if we look at Freemasonry, the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. And Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge, okay? And the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the teachings of ancient Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees, Read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, a brilliant historian and archaeologist, Tony Browder. Page 18 and 32, he breaks this down. And 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, okay? 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, 1787. Here's a bronze statue, famous bronze statue of Asar, Aset, Heru. Asar or Osiris is in the middle. We see Aset with the horns and Heru, the sun, who was the son of God, born on December 25th, according to the mythology. We see this famous statue of Aset, who the Greeks called Isis, and we see the copy of her from DC Comics in the superheroine of Isis. And Isis gets her powers from ancient Egypt. And this is the DVD cover of the complete series, The Secrets of Isis, which used to come on Saturday mornings, the Shazam and Isis Hour on CBS. And I used to watch it every Saturday morning, the Shazam and Isis Hour. And they showed us this white woman who they said got her powers from ancient Egypt. Her name was Isis. But we didn't know she was a copy in the mythology of an African woman named Aset. And Aset gives birth to the baby Heru of an Immaculate Conception, virgin birth on December 25th. And from Aset, we get the Black Madonna and child worship all throughout Europe during the Dark Ages. And as we have a rise in the European phenotype, as Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages, late 1400s, early 1500s, and they're conquering people's land, taking control of people's resources, rebuilding Europe, you have a rise in the European phenotype. A lot of these traditional African images get reinterpreted as European. So we get the white Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. We see Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel using his relatives, his aunt and uncle, as the models for Adam and Eve, and painting them European and painting God as European. Okay? So as you have a rise in European powers, you have a rise in the European phenotype and the dominance of the European phenotype and the dominance of European culture, European ways of doing things, okay? So these are just some of the things we deal with. We deal with Christopher Columbus, have to deal with Columbus. Where Columbus went on his 4 voyages, he never comes to the land we call the United States of America. And at least 70% of the people Columbus encounters on his 4 voyages are African people. Dr. David Imhotep deals with this in The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. At least 70% of the people he encounters on his 4 voyages were African people. Okay? We deal with some slave rebellions. We talk about the father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, who did unspeakable experiments on enslaved Africans, especially African women. We talk about the 3 great West African kingdoms, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Fake Willie Lynch letter, 1712. Willie Lynch never historically existed. The words in the Willie Lynch letter didn't even exist in the early 18th century, 1712, where if they did, the way they were used in 1712 is much different than the way they're used today. So these are some of the things that we deal with, okay? That's why it's 14 hours. It's 14 hours, 7-session online course. It's all on demand. Watch at your own pace. We have it in the bundle pack. And it includes other online courses, all taught by myself. Like Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, African-American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences, and some others. So it's on sale now, $60, regularly $130. And this helps support the African History Network as well. You're going to learn a lot from these. Go at your own pace. Watch from around the world. Watch on your smartphone, your tablet, your computer. Okay? You can also register at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can also register there. It's right on the homepage of the website. Okay? All right. And, you know, what you do for yourself, the reason why history and culture is so important, what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you haven't thought, what you haven't taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay, Oluduware, that's a Yoruba word, Yoruba name. Oludare, I should say. Digla Oludumare, which is the name of the creator in Ifa. But Oludare said Spain and Portugal had ambassadors from African kingdoms in their country as far back as 12th century. Had ambassadors from African kingdoms, yeah. Okay. Well, the Moors go in 8th century AD. Okay, Toya said during my years in undergrad, a professor gave us the Willie Lynch letter to study for a test. Yeah, Willie Lynch is a fraud. Oludare said there was originally one homeland on one giant landmass continent. What are you referring to? Now, we did not have one name for the continent. We named different regions of the continent that we call Africa. This needs to be in world history. Thanks for sharing the information. Sure need to be corrected, said Dupree. Mexicans are not responsible for the placement of jobs. It's robots doing the job. Yeah, largely software programs, things like this. Some jobs have been shipped overseas, but largely, see, factory output has doubled since the 1980s. This is something Trump didn't talk about. Factory output has doubled since the 1980s, but companies are doing this with 1/3 the labor force. Okay, they're doing this with 1/3 the labor force. So all these jobs are not lost because of Mexicans taking the jobs or Hispanics taking the jobs. They're being used as a scapegoat. It's just like during the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, when you had a political party called the Nativist Party or the American Party, ostensibly called the Know Nothing Party. And they were made up of a lot of pro-whites who were anti-immigration. And they blamed Irish and Chinese and things like this for taking their jobs. Okay, they sound a lot like Donald Trump supporters. Read this article from marketwatch.com. Think nothing is made in America. Output has doubled in 3 decades. March 28, 2016. U.S. manufacturing is not dead. Factories are running at close to a record pace. Okay, read this article from MarketWatch. This is what Trump didn't tell you. Trump was preying on the fears of the browning of America. And he still is not talking about retraining the workforce because, see, there's a skills gap. This is why you have 6.7 million unfilled jobs. There's a skills gap, okay, in America. So there needs to be a retraining. All right, so, okay, and those who, how many, who are Black business owners here? Post the name of your business. You can register. You can email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay, so I do a weekly radio show, the African History Network show, and I do some broadcasts throughout the week. I upload the radio show and the broadcast to our Blog Talk Radio page, our Blog Talk Radio channel, I should say, which I've had for about 8 years. We have close to 900 audio podcasts there. And Each episode gets between 4,000 to 8,000 listens just on Blog Talk alone. So when I upload the Blog Talk, it automatically is automatically uploaded to our iTunes page, TuneIn.com, the TuneIn app, TuneIn.com, Castbox, which is another platform for podcasts, Acast, and FM Player. So each episode gets thousands of listeners. Okay, and if you don't have a 30 to 60-second commercial, we create one for you at no additional charge. We place it into our podcast to promote your business. Your upcoming event, you may own an African-American bookstore, you may have an event coming up, whether it's a lecture, whether it's a yoga festival, whether it's a Caribbean festival, whether you are a book author, whether you sell jewelry online, clothing online, or whether you have a brick and mortar store. We want to target African Americans. We reach thousands of them on a weekly basis, okay? And also we put your ad in our email newsletter as well that we send out 3 to 4 times a week. We have a database of about 23,000 people. So you want to take your African American owned business to the next level, you can advertise with the African History Network. We have a special promotion right now for limited time only. We have a few slots left. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com for more information. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com for more information. Okay. All right. So look, we have to get out of here. Hey, remember at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. And I forgot to tell you, let's see, Friday, August 10th through Sunday, August 12th, I will be in San Diego for Return of the Gods, the Real Family Reunion. You have comedian Michael Collier, who's one of the hosts, and Lord Jamar of Brand Nubian, and Rod Digger will be there as well. Professor Kaba Kamene is being honored. I'm being honored. Thomas T.J. Lofton will be there also. Queen Afua, Chef Aki. Just a few of the people who will be there, okay? Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information. We have the link there right on the homepage. And there's a 3-day pass that you can purchase as well. This 3-day pass. We have the link there also. Return of the Gods is a royal festival celebrating the shift and rise to enlightenment. Teachers and scholars, so come out for an amazing show of live hip hop, motivational speakers, live African dancers, martial arts demonstrations, yoga, and an award ceremony of master teachers and scholars, including Michael Imhotep, host of the African History Network show, Professor Kaba Kamene of the Hidden Colors documentaries in 1804 and the Black Friday series, Queen Afua, and many more, okay? So check that out. All right. So at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now this corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.